Well, we are excited for the episode today. We're going to be talking about confusion about outcomes and why this is fundamentally a problem with communication. Deacon Michael, why? Tell us a little more.
Yeah, well, this is a problem in a lot of organizations because, you have meetings, you have a lot of meetings in a lot of organizations, and things get discussed and assignments get made. And so often, the balls get dropped. People don't follow through on their assignments, and people are confused about who's supposed to do what. And then you have to have the meeting again. And so it goes. And it just feels like, you were talking about, you went out for a walk. Was it yesterday? And you were trying to walk through 2 feet of snow. And that's kind of what it feels like in a lot of organizations. You get this resistance, or trying to walk in a swimming pool. You get this resistance and you just can't seem to execute. And a lot of times it's because people aren't clear about their assignments, balls get dropped, people get angry with each other, and we're going to fix all that tonight, God willing.
So cool. All right. So as we begin, let me encourage you to post your questions in the comments section of YouTube or wherever you happen to be watching. Deacon Michael will be answering those questions live in the second half of our show. If you want to ask your question anonymously, you can text us at 615-721-2303. All right. So Deacon Michael, say a little bit more.
Yeah. So let me just say, let me give an example. So, sometimes people give us an assignment and it's not malice. It's not incompetence why we drop the ball. It's often an issue having to do with the process. And I'll give you a good example. And I'm confessing this before all my ancient faith friends. So Matushka, Trudy, and John sent me an email last week and they said, hey, we would like to have the promotional copy for the episode and the thumbnail image that we can send out in the newsletter, basically roughly 10 days in advance of the show. And so I got that in plenty of time, and they were crystal clear on what they wanted, and I dropped the ball. And it wasn't because, I decided that I was going to ignore it or not pay attention to it. I didn't get it into my system. And now I've got a simple reminder on my calendar. In fact, I put it the day before it's due just so I can get it done a day ahead of time. But it wasn't because I was incompetent. And believe me, I'm plenty incompetent at a lot of things, but it wasn't because I was incompetent. It was just that I didn't have a process solution. And that's what we're going to talk about here. And I think that happens in a lot of situations. I think you had some examples too.
Well, I just wanted to say that my whole experience of early ministry was literally the same image of dropping balls, of feeling like when I was hired, I was given 4 balls to juggle. I knew 4 different projects, and I really could only juggle 3 at once. So there was always a drop ball, and I'd go, which one's on the floor now? Right? And it also felt like I felt a little bit like I was attending a garden, maybe like an indoor window garden. And I'd just get really into one plant and I'd see the 2 plants next to it and they'd look cute and, they'd be looking good, or I'd prune those and water them. And then, oh my gosh, a plant had died, or it was like withered and was just about to die. And so I think it very much, anyone going into a new ministry job, I can imagine, such empathy for clergy going into new parishes where there's been a whole lot going on and a lot that nobody's ever written down, and just assumptions about the way things should go. And it feels like you're being handed a lot of balls. And how can you possibly, and most of us don't know how to juggle even when we start.
No. And
Right?
I think this is one of the reasons why people hate meetings, because they go to these meetings, and this is why people say, I went to the parish council again, or I went to this meeting or this board meeting, and it was a total waste of time. And the reason it's a total waste of time is you spend all this time preparing, you spend all the time at the meeting, people get assignments, and then you come back together and nothing's been done. And it's just really frustrating. And you think there's got to be a better way, or there's got to be a better use of my time. And so this is why I think people dread meetings and why they try to avoid them at all costs. And they don't have to be that way. I actually look forward to meetings in my own company, but we've built, based on the principles that I'm going to share today, we've built a culture of execution. And I think that's what this is going to do for people, that if they'll apply this framework, and we're literally going to be talking about a 5 part framework, 5 elements for this communications process that really will change this in your church, in your ministry, even in your business. I know not everybody who's watching is in ministry, but wherever you are in organizational life, this is going to really help.
I love it. And I want to go back to, the first podcast on this round about us being the change. I will commit to change, right?
Yes.
And this is another one of these areas where just that committing to change can make all the difference in the world. Won't solve all the problems. You can't suddenly juggle 4 balls when you don't even know how to juggle 3.
Yeah.
But it'll get you somewhere.
Well, that's kind of a different problem too, being too busy. And the truth is there's a lot of leaders, a lot of pastors, man, I have so much empathy for priests that, have got 2 jobs basically, or more than 1 job. They're trying to be the priest. They're trying to be the person that's leading worship and hearing confession and doing some level of therapy and being the facilities manager and the fundraiser and all these things. I mean, it's a lot, right? But again, that's where this process can really help.
It's great. All right, dig in.
All right.
Teach us.
So 5 elements here, and let me just get to these. And here's the first one. You need, in a meeting, a designated facilitator. Now, from my experience, it's very difficult to lead a meeting, to fully engage and participate in the meeting, if I'm also the person that's trying to take notes, make sure that I capture the key components of the discussion, that I follow up or make a note of the things that we need to follow up on. And so what we advocate and what we teach in our business coaching program, which I think is readily applicable in a ministry context, is that you basically have 2 people. So you have a meeting leader, and that's the person who's leading the conversation, who's introducing the topics, who's keeping the meeting moving along, who's making sure that it finishes on time, that that people are brought to commitment, that there's clear follow-up, all that stuff. That's the meeting leader. But then it's really helpful if you have a designated facilitator. Now, here's what the facilitator does. The facilitator's job is different from the meeting leader. His or her job is they're responsible for taking notes, sometimes called minutes, and then distributing those notes, and especially any decisions from the meeting. Sometimes they're also responsible for following up on assignments to make sure that commitments are kept. Now, the first time that I ever experienced this, and was when I was back in the book publishing business, and one of my authors was John Maxwell, the famed leadership expert and author. He was one of my authors. And so I said to him, as his publisher, I said, I need to meet with you privately, and I wonder if we could find a time to do that. And he said, well, by private, do you mean like just the 2 of us? And I said, yeah, just the 2 of us. And he said, I actually don't do meetings that way. He said, unless Linda, my assistant, is there. He said, if you expect any follow-up from that meeting, Linda's got to be there. And I just learned over the years, Linda still works for him to this very day. And I've known John for about 25 years. Linda continues to work for him. And that's the way they work. John has figured out that if he's going to engage fully in the conversation, if he's going to move it along, he's got to have somebody capture the notes and make sure that John follows through. And I like that.
That's amazing.
Now, I get that you're probably not going to do that for confession if you're a priest, right? You can't have a third party in the confession. Or if you're in a counseling session, you probably can't either. But you've got to make sure that you've got some kind of system. If you can't have a designated facilitator, if you don't have somebody else become the designated facilitator, guess what? You are the designated facilitator. You're going to be the one that has to capture the notes and make sure that things get followed up on. Now, I can tell you that for many of our coaches, what they do, kind of a analog here, is that they will take notes, and immediately after the coaching session, so this could be a counseling session for those of you that are in that kind of ministry, is just capture your thoughts while it's still fresh. And I know that when I went to my therapist back in the day, that was what they do. They would be taking notes as we're talking, but then they would take a few minutes. They would build time in between appointments so that they could capture those notes and make sure they have a written record. Because if you're seeing a lot of people, and this is true for my coaching practice, if I'm seeing a lot of people, I can't remember, and I don't have memory problems, but I can't remember from session to session unless I'm taking notes and can refer to those notes. And I certainly can't help my clients by holding them accountable for the commitments and the decisions that we've made. And I want to do that. I want to be accountable and I want to hold them accountable. So having a designated facilitator is one way to do that.
Can I put you on the spot right here on this one?
You can.
So, we're talking about all sorts of different types of meetings that you might have in a parish context. So parish council meetings, clergy meetings, team meetings,
Yep.
working group meetings, things like that. If somebody is new to this, can you just talk about how you might ask somebody to facilitate?
Yeah, I literally just had to do this past week. So as you know, Ann, and many of you that have been with us for a while know, I'm the executive chairman of St. Vlad's Seminary in New York. And so in that kind of corporate structure, I'm the executive chair and we have a designated secretary. And so Jim Spencer is our designated secretary. But in addition to the board meetings, and he does take notes and he's a phenomenal note taker and he gets them distributed. He's like sort of the iconic, in my view, designated facilitator. But we also do executive committee meetings. So he takes those meetings twice a year when we meet. But then we have executive committee meetings once a month. And so he said to me 2 weeks ago, and he's leading our relocation committee, which, we've been very public about, but he's leading that committee. And he said, honestly, with everything on my plate, I don't have the time to do what is necessary to do a good job in terms of being the designated facilitator for the executive committee. Could you find somebody else? And I'm thinking to myself, okay. I said, could you recommend somebody? And he did. He said, I think Wesley would do a great job. And I said, oh, yeah, I think Wesley would do a great job. So I said, Wesley, would you be willing to serve in this role? And I told him exactly what was required. And he said, yes. And I wrote back to Jim and Jim was thrilled. But here's what I think we have to remember, Ann. There are people that want to make a contribution who are uniquely gifted for this. And they're the best people to do it. We think, well, it's easy to invite people into the more glamorous things. If we invited them to do, something that was, from our perspective, less drudgery. But from their perspective, it's not drudgery. They enjoy doing it. Maybe they have a gift for organization or follow through or whatever. Those are the kind of people that you need. Jim Kelly on my team, whom you've had interaction with, he's my executive assistant. Jim is phenomenal at this. He captures all my coaching appointment notes and the follow through. And the day before I meet with the client, he gives me just a quick summary. You committed to doing this. You've got them all done. You're good. Here's what the client committed to, just to remind you. So he loves doing that.
That's great. Any tips on if you were brand new to this and or brand new at a new org, new parish, how you might pick your first person?
Well, I would pick somebody that's got some ability with this, who may be really good at organization. They've demonstrated the ability to keep commitments themselves. You might have to teach them and might have to instruct them, but we're going to get into this a little bit more later. You don't want like a transcript of the meeting or super detailed notes. You want just sort of a high level summary, but what you really want is you want to capture those commitments. You want to make sure that any assignments, any commitments that were made, those are captured. I'm going to talk about a specific way to do that. But this isn't rocket science. And by the way, neither is leading a meeting. So none of this is rocket science, but you just got to find somebody that's got a heart for it and maybe has demonstrated some ability with this in the past.
That's so helpful. The insight of capturing commitments. That's the key role here. No one lose. That's great. Okay. So first element of your system is a designated facilitator. What's the second?
Okay. The second one, let me get back to my screen here, is this, what we call the one conversation rule. Now, have I mentioned this before? Do you recall?
You have mentioned it, but you've mentioned it I know you've had dinners where you do one conversation with your whole staff team. I haven't heard you talk about it in meeting scenarios yet.
Okay, we actually use this everywhere, including in our own family, when we have like Thanksgiving dinner or a Christmas dinner or a family get together. I mean, obviously there's that part, before you start eating dinner or whatever, and everybody's just chatting, and there's 10 conversations going on, and that's fine. But once we come together, then we have one conversation. And this is beautiful in a meeting. So I'm going to talk to you about how I learned this. It's not original with me. So I had another author by the name of Lucy Swindoll. She's now reposed, but had a huge influence on me. And she invited several of us to her home for dinner. And there were probably 15 of us. We were all around one table. And she stood up. She asked somebody to pray. And then she stood up and she said, hey, before we eat, I have one request. And she said, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about tonight. She said, I don't really care. But my one request is that we have one conversation. And here's what that means. One person talks at a time, no side conversations, and everybody listens to the person talking. And it was so amazing because what happened is, I don't know about you, but I get easily distracted. So if I'm having a conversation with somebody across the table and I'm hearing a conversation that's next to me on my right and the conversation next to me on my left, and I'm trying to just, intensely listen to this person. And so you end up having these very superficial, not that meaningful conversations. But when you do the one conversation rule, everybody gets a chance. And if I'm the one that's leading the meeting, I'm going to be calling out the people that are quiet, gently coaxing them to share with the group. So I might say, Ann, you haven't said anything yet. What do you think about this topic? And so it gives everybody an opportunity to really process it. We used to, when I went to St. Vlad's, for example, and this is very normal for most corporate board meetings, is there were all kinds of side conversations going on. And, it was stressful for me as the meeting leader because I'm thinking, I feel like I'm trying to corral cats, right? And so Zoom helped clean that up a little bit because you can't really have the side conversations.
Oh, but you can.
In chat, I know.
You can, and it is a struggle, but the side conversations are often hilarious, but they do need to get shut down.
Yeah, and I think, but you got to speak to it. So I think you got to lay the ground rules and just say, okay, we want to have a really meaningful, thoughtful conversation. And when I was doing these things, when I was doing the board meetings where, it was not one conversation, it was lots of conversations going on, you feel like you kind of lose control of the room. And then you got some people that just check out. They're just like, well, whatever, I'm going to just, be on my device. And that's why people hate meetings. But when you have the one conversation rule, you can really explore something in depth. You can really hear people out. And particularly the people that aren't dominant, the people that are not, that a lot of people it's just easy for them to express themselves. And if you're not careful, they can take over the meeting. Sort of the loudest, most talkative person controls the meeting. But in the one conversation rule, what happens is that everybody usually gets a chance. And especially if the leader's thoughtful and calls the more quiet people to speak up, then you get a really balanced, full-orbed kind of perspective where it's not just a few people doing the thinking, but it's everybody doing the thinking together. It will dramatically change the quality of your meetings.
That's awesome. Okay, so the first element of your system is a designated facilitator. The second is the one conversation rule. What's the third?
The third one is this, written notes. Written notes. Now, you probably figured that out, but human memory is frail, even when it's functioning more or less as God intended it. We just forget stuff. The Bible's replete with all kinds of warnings. Do not forget. Why? Because we're forgetful. We misremember things. I read recently that half of our memories may be false or distorted. And I was actually kind of astonished by that, not because of that statistic, but I think that's way too low. And I can remember back when I was trying to put together an anecdote that I was going to use in one of my speeches, and it was a story about my family. And I began to wonder as I put this story together, and it was going to be an introductory story that sort of set up the whole talk. And I thought, I wonder how much of that I've made up. I wonder if it's really the way it happened. So I went to my sister and I said, sis, here's how I remember that situation in our home back when we were teenagers. But could you help me? Do I have it right or not? Because what I don't want to do is embellish or enhance or distort or make it something that it wasn't. And so I gave her my version of it. And she said, well, honestly, that's the way I remember it too. So I breathed a sigh of relief. And so you've got to be able to write things down, because in between meetings, a lot happens. And this is particularly important in a situation like in the church, where you have a lot of volunteers who are very busy in their jobs and at home and other community activities, and they can't remember what was said between meetings, and you've got to record it. And I had somebody one time tell me, they said, well, you guys just don't listen very well. Well, I think we try to listen, but it's just not our full-time job. Those of us that are serving on boards, parish councils, all the rest, they're parachuting in. They have a meeting for an hour and a half, and then they leave, and they don't think about it again till next month or whenever it is. So written notes will save you a lot of grief, and will get everybody caught back up on the same page. So what you want to do is like I said before, you don't want to take an overly detailed set of meeting notes. First of all, it does create legal liability if you do that, because those are all subject to discovery. And if you've got too much back and forth, you're probably asking for problems. But what we try to do, and what lawyers that have advised me on this have said to me, is you want to keep a record of the topics that were discussed, but then you also want to have a record of the attendees, the people that were present. Then you want to have a record of the decisions that were made. And I'm going to talk about a specific format for that in just a minute. But if an assignment or a commitment is made, you should capture the exact deliverable, the name of the person responsible, and the due date. Now, I want to give you a pro tip. So if you do Zoom meetings, and we all do Zoom meetings, right? I mean, that's one of the great things that's come out of the pandemic. I think meeting life has changed forever. Yeah, we're going to still have in-person meetings, but I think there's a lot of meetings that we can have on Zoom. But here's a cool thing, and I do this with my coaching calls. So I record all those calls. So Zoom automatically sends me a recording of the Zoom call immediately after the meeting. I can't believe how fast I can get this done, but it comes immediately, right? Then there's a website called otter.ai, OTTR.ai, which is a transcription service. Now, I didn't hook this up myself, but our team did. But you can hook Otter into Zoom. So here's what's crazy. I get the recording, the video recording, for every meeting that I do, where, and obviously if you're recording on a Zoom call, the other party's going to know it and have to give permission for it. But then Otter gives to me a word for word transcription that's about probably 98% accurate. And so then whoever's keeping the meeting notes can go back in and summarize those. Now, I get that sort of contradicts what I just said about that may create the liability, because that's also discoverable. You can dispose of them if you want, depends on what your document retention policy is. Check with an attorney in your parish or in your ministry, but it's super helpful.
That is so awesome. Thank you for that tip. I did not know about Otter AI, and I will be using it with some meeting notes from last week. So fabulous.
Good.
All right. So the first element of your system is designated facilitator. The second is one conversation rule. The third is written notes. What's the fourth?
The fourth is communication templates. Now, written notes are only as effective as they are clear, and that's where templates can help. They ensure that we capture all the relevant information in a very specific kind of format so that we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. Like maybe you go into a meeting, you come out of the meeting, you go, oh, it was an amazing meeting. And somebody says, yeah, but did we capture, everything we needed to capture? Did we capture the commitments? And you go, oh, I totally forgot about that. Well, if you have a communications template that you're using for something like that, it makes it easy. We use templates for things like delegation. When we make a delegation to an administrative assistant or to another team member, we have a tool called the Vision Caster, which enables us, those of us that are in supervision, to capture in writing what it is that we want the person who's going to be following up to do. And so that's, another great tool. So I do have an example that I want to share with people of a tool that we've got called the Effective Meeting Blueprint. And you can download it for free right there at that URL, mhyatt.us/EMB, like effective meeting blueprint. Let me just put that up on the screen again, just so you guys have got it. Maybe I can't do that. Oh, there we go. Yeah, you might want to write that down, but that's a great meeting template. I use it literally for every meeting I do. But there's two things that I want you to notice about it when you open it up that I think are hugely helpful. At the very beginning of the meeting, we always ask for, first of all, achievements that happened since we last met. Now, the reason we do that is because we want to give the team a sense of momentum, like we've been accomplishing things, that we're winning together. That changes kind of the whole tone of the meeting. Have you found that to be true? You were nodding your head.
Totally true. And it's so easy to forget it, and it makes such a difference in tone.
Yeah, it's right there on the template, so you don't forget it. Then the second item is to set expectations. So as the meeting leader, I've already designated on this template what the purpose of the meeting is and what the desired outcomes are. So I just share that with the group. We're here to discuss. We're here to brainstorm. I'm here to inform you. Whatever it is, whatever the meeting purpose is, that's captured in the form, and it makes sure that we're clear. Because, I mean, there's so many times we've all gone to meetings and we're going like, what is the purpose of this meeting? What are we here to do? But this helps you as the leader get clear on it and then get everybody else aligned around achieving that same purpose inside the meeting. Enormously helpful. But here's the third item, and the point I wanted to point out is that you want to review previous assignments if there were any. So in the last meeting, there were assignments made, there were commitments made, and this is where we're going to review those before we get into any new business, before we get into any new topics. We are going to talk about what we committed to do the last time we were together. This has such a benefit. It creates a culture of accountability. If people know that this is a recurring thing on all of your agendas, that you're always going to ask about the previous commitments, which were captured in the notes that were circulated, if you're going to start with that, relatively speaking, on the front end of the meeting, they will begin to come prepared, because nobody wants to be embarrassed in front of their peers or be the one person who is publicly dropping the ball in front of everybody else. So we put that at the very front end. All my meetings are bookended by this. So I got that on the front end. Then the very last thing we do is essentially establish ownership. You know, we just review and say, okay, during the meeting, these were the commitments, and this would be the meeting facilitator talking, the designated facilitator talking, said, okay, during the meeting, these were the commitments that were made. We had 5 commitments. Let me read these off, make sure that we're all clear on what we committed to do. And so you might say things like, and in fact, I would say that a clearly worded assignment needs to have 4 elements. First of all, the action that they're responsible for, or anybody's responsible for. Start with a verb. Okay, so here's an example. Create a 3-year financial statement for our parish. I literally just did this. We're preparing for strategic planning for our parish. I'm in charge of leading that or facilitating that. So I ask our treasurer, create a 3-year financial statement for our parish. Okay, so that's the action. Then what's the expectation? What, if anything, should be done with that work product? Okay, he creates it. Now what? Right? So distribute it to the parish council. So that was the expectation. Deadline. Every task must be assigned a due date. So maybe it's by March the 1st. Whatever it is, give it a hard due date so people know clearly what the expectation is. And then finally, number 4, the owner. So who's responsible to do this? So in this case, it was Troy, who's our treasurer. So the full assignment might read something like this. And I'm just reading from my notes. Troy will create a 3-year financial statement for our parish and distribute it to the parish council no later than March the 1st. Now, in Troy's case, he's a super achiever and already got it out. So that was amazing. But it was clear. It was expressed. Remember that clarity grid that we did? This met those qualifications for the clarity grid. It was specific and it was expressed. But again, the beauty of using a template is that it gives you all the information you got to capture. You know, this is why everybody from NASA to airline pilots to doctors to whomever, they use checklists because they don't want to miss anything. because human memory is frail. So make use of templates. Don't keep reinventing the wheel. And by the way, don't have a meeting, especially one that involves more than two people. Don't have a meeting without an agenda. And that effective meeting blueprint will give you a track to run on, a format to follow.
So great. Okay, so the first element of your system is a designated facilitator. The second is the one conversation rule. The third is written notes. The fourth is communication templates. Tell us the fifth, Deacon Michael.
The fifth one, is distribution standards. Distribution standards. So in addition to being specific, the notes have to be expressed. In other words, they have to be circulated. If the designated facilitator goes to the trouble to take the notes, but if those just get, shoved onto your hard drive or stuck in a drawer somewhere, that doesn't do anybody any good. Those have got to be distributed to the people that were in attendance so they can follow up on their assignments. And so they're clear from the get-go, what they need to do. So we have a standard inside of our organization. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about distribution standards, that meeting notes will be distributed within 24 hours of the meeting having occurred. Now, there's a practical reason for that. Over time, our memories fade. So that if the designated facilitator waits a month until right before the next meeting, they're not going to remember either. Right? So they're gonna have the same problem everybody else has, and they can't remember what they discussed other than what they did on their notes. But usually if you're taking notes, there's going to be some stuff that you need to fill in, some color commentary that you need to add to it. So that's best done as soon after the meeting as is possible. So we just established a standard of 24 hours. And when you recruit a designated facilitator, you need to make that standard clear and ask them if they think they can do that. And, there's going to be occasions where they can't get to it right away or whatever, but as close to the meeting as is possible and distribute it to everybody. Then everybody's working from the same common framework, the same set of expectations and assumptions. And it's really good if you can have one place where you capture all these, whether it's in a portal or it's in Slack or it's in Dropbox, where you've got a folder that at any point somebody can go back and access those key documents. And again, these would be the people that are involved, like the parish council, let's say. Like if you had a Dropbox folder that was all the meeting minutes from all the parish councils, here's what's great about that, is that when you invite somebody new to serve on the parish council, or they get elected, depending on what your system of governance is, then they can quickly catch up. I'm not the kind of person that would go back and read the previous minutes, but there are a lot of people that are. We just have a brand new board member at St. Vlad's, and he's asking for all this historical data because he wants to be up to speed. He's taking his responsibility as a trustee very seriously. So that's the thing you can do with those meeting notes too. So have a distribution standard and then adhere to it.
That is awesome. Okay, so we want to get to our listeners' questions, but first let me summarize what I heard you say. If we want to avoid dropped balls and organizational inefficiency, we need to be more intentional with the communication process. The right process, particularly in the context of meetings where most communication happens, is to include 5 elements. First, a designated facilitator. Second, the one conversation rule. Third, written notes. Fourth, communication templates. And fifth, distribution standards. Okay, with that, let's take some questions. Again, if you have a question or even a comment, just post it in the comment section below. If you also want to ask your question anonymously, you may text us at 615-721-2303.
And I've got that page pulled up where I can see those text messages. So send them in. Do you see any questions in the comments?
I didn't actually. We have somebody who's a secretary here, so he probably has good experience of this.
Yeah, I saw he was talking about he was in the Libertarian Party of Iowa.
And I did find yeah.
Yeah, and he said their procedure was to send out the agenda, usually sent out prior to the meeting. Yes, absolutely. That's a great thing to do with parish council meetings. Here's the thing you have to remember. Not everybody is a quick start and can think on their feet. Some people are and this is not a bad thing, but some people are slower processors. They just need to marinate in it a little bit and think, and you're going to get the best input from them if they've got a chance to pre-think it, not if it's sprung on them at the last minute. So if you've got an agenda, it's great to circulate that in advance. One of the things we do for St. Vlad's, and this is true for larger organizations and was definitely true in the corporate world where I worked for our board meetings, is we would circulate a board book, literally the agenda and all the committee reports, any backup documentation, anything we wanted to see. And our distribution standard for that, this wasn't true before I became the executive chair, we would get this stuff distributed at the meetings. You know, so you're getting all these papers flying around and you're trying to figure out what goes with what. And you get this horrible stack of papers. So I said, let's just do a board book. I mean, I was used to this in the corporate world, and we distribute it a month before the meeting. So our trustees have a solid month to review those documents and to come prepared. And then the great thing is, as the meeting leader, I can say, okay, let's all turn to page 32 and let's, carry on from here. So everybody's on literally the same page, the same numbered page.
That's fabulous. I did find a question here from Randy Anderson. Thinking of your meeting template document, do you imagine that the meeting minutes are taken right on the template?
No, what I didn't give you is we actually have another template that's a meeting minute template. That's really the template for the agenda. I probably should have captured that one too. But yeah, I would just say, first of all, you can build your own template. What's the essential information? Like I can tell you that our template for St. Vlad's is we capture all the action stuff literally in a table. This is a Word document, but in a table at the very front of the document. So you see immediately, not at the end of the document, but immediately at the beginning, these were the commitments that we made in this meeting. These were the assignments that were made in this meeting. Then we get into the topics that we talked about. So yeah, you can build your own, and I don't care if it's in Google Documents or, Microsoft Word, whatever it is, but build a template. All those have template functionality to them.
I just want to repeat for listeners, thinking of those actions, that those 4 parts that you have to the actions that are so good, that it should have an action, an expectation, a deadline, and an owner. So helpful.
Good. Let's see if we got any other questions here. R. Anderson said, I used the one in your book. Yes. So I have a book called No Fail Meetings, and it goes into all this stuff. Yeah, that's No Fail Communication.
Oh, sorry. Right. No fail meetings. I
That's
have it
okay.
too.
And No Fail Communication is really what we're covering in this series, but No Fail Meetings goes into that in depth. And those templates are in the back of the book. And actually, we have a URL where you can download them, but it's in the book, and I don't have it off the top of my head.
The red one.
Yes, the red one. Let's see if I've got it up here. Yeah, it's pretty funny. I don't have it. It's out in the garage.
When you prepare for a meeting, Deacon Michael, how long does it take you usually? And what's the sort of length time to responsibility to, I'm sure it varies greatly, but, as you think about it, sometimes I feel like I prepare so long and then everything that I prepared for, I only use a tiny fraction of. Other times I feel like I could have used way more time than I prepared for, and I needed to, and I didn't. So.
Well, it depends on whether I'm leading the meeting or just participating. Right? Those are 2 different things. So if I'm leading, for sure, like at St. Vlad's, I want to make sure that I've read through the board book. I've highlighted it, I've made notes in it, all that kind of thing. But I would say that's probably for me a 2-hour preparation for that. But you have to understand that the agenda has been compiled in a couple of executive committee meetings. It's been collated from all the different executive committee members. The committee chairs prepare their stuff. There's a lot of preparation that goes in behind the scenes before I ever see it, but it's usually probably a couple hours. And I will say this, I think this is really important when you bring people into any kind of, I don't care if it's a task force or if it's a committee or if it's a standing board, that you make it very clear what you're asking them to commit to. Because, and the way I would frame it is this, I would say, you know, everything that we've been given is a stewardship. And we all want to be the very best stewards we can be of our time, our talent, and our treasure. And here's what that looks like. So, for example, if you're recruiting somebody to your organization, Ann, and they're going to be on your board, and if you're expecting a financial commitment from them, that you want to have your board members set the pace in terms of being donors to your ministry, tell them that on the front end. You know, is there a minimum required donation? Some people may just opt out. They say, well, I just can't do that. And maybe there's not one of those, and that's fine. Also be clear on the time. You know, I would say, for example, at St. Vlad's, I would say, look, we do 2 meetings a year on campus when it's not COVID. And usually that's a 2-day meeting each time. You will be expected to cover your own expenses. You will be expected to prepare, and that you should expect that that's going to take about 2 hours before you come to the meeting or whatever it's going to be. And if I'm going to appoint somebody to the executive committee or to a committee, I make it very clear what their commitment's going to be, because I don't want them to be surprised. I want them to know what they're signing up for. And it also creates the expectation that they're going to come prepared.
That's great.
All righty. I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm so grateful for everybody hanging with us, because this was kind of crazy to get started to.
I still think we ought to blame it on the snowstorm.
I think so too.
Yep. We are grateful that you all were with us tonight. And Deacon Michael, thank you so much for your time and your investment with us.
You're welcome.
We will be back here again next week, God willing, at the same time. And we will discuss communication overload, which sounds perfect. We're going to talk about who gets access to you and how to say no with grace. We're also talking about how to get through your inboxes more efficiently. Deacon Michael, as we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts?
I do want to say about this topic next week, this might be controversial, because people in ministry are notoriously bad at saying no. They either feel like they can't say no, or they don't know how to say no, or they're afraid of consequences of saying no. And we're going to talk about how to establish boundaries and why that's good for you and why it's good for the people that you lead. I don't really have any other final thoughts on the topic we talked about tonight, but I am super excited about this topic next week. It's going to be fun.
Thank you, Deacon Michael. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Have a great week.
Talk to you later.